Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Seth Shapiro, and I am a senior consultant with Admissionato, a premier admissions consulting firm focusing on the college, MBA, and graduate school processes. I am so excited to have everyone here today. I just want to start off by a little bit of a format. If everyone who's here, assuming you feel comfortable, would engage in the comments section in our session, that would be really helpful. Tell us, who you are, where you're from, any information about what you might be looking at. That would be really helpful. I won't be taking any questions during the presentation, so I can get through the materials in efficient fashion. But feel free to list your questions in the comments section, and I will address them in the order in which they arrive. So, other than that, I think we're all set here. So, why don't we kind of get started in the presentation, and we'll go from there. So, as I mentioned, we are a premier admissions counseling and consulting firm. I strongly urge anyone who is actively applying this upcoming MBA season 2022 to 2023, or is thinking about an MBA maybe for the following year, or any sort of circumstances, to get in touch with us. We offer free consultations to those who are seriously looking at our packages. We offer a variety of different suite of services. So if you're interested in something bulky, all the above, we have that. If you're looking for more one-off support, we offer that as well. So get in touch with us, and we're happy to kind of chat through how we can find the best fit possible. All right. So this session today, hosted in coordination with Gmat Club, is all about school-specific application strategies. And I'll get into a little bit more about what that means. But this is very much focused on the collective application itself. So we'll cover everything in terms of materials from preparing your visits, your research, all the way through the actual application, and then finally to the decision, right? Or if waitlist, or any sort of implications about where you might end up if you're fortunate to receive at least one acceptance. Okay, so this is a similar statement here about providing you a framework. We're not actually going to dig into any one particular school. I mean, I will cite a few examples throughout the presentation, just to elucidate what it is I'm talking about. But this is a framework. This is not a specific strategy for Harvard Business School or London Business School or Fuqua. The idea is to say, okay, if you want to develop a school by school strategy, here is going to be the best way to go about that. So the question that one would ask is, well, why is this necessary? Why does one have to build a school-specific strategy? And it's interesting because there are a lot of similarities to the undergraduate process, keeping in mind that there are differences in countries and geographies and processes and all that. I get that. But at a very high level, especially for those who are familiar with the US, it is similar in a lot of ways, in that schools that you're really excited about, and that you think you have a good chance in, and you want to maximize your possibilities, they do require that you have an understanding of the school, that you demonstrate that there's a fit. And so we believe that that is even more paramount in the MBA process, because unlike the undergraduate process, the MBA process is not nearly as voluminous in terms of the number of schools you apply to. So for example, an undergraduate, or a high school student rather, applying for undergraduate admission in the US might apply, say, anywhere from 12 to 20 schools, right? Let's throw that out there. The MBA process is going to be significantly less than that. In a lot of cases, an average could be between 3 and 6 schools. And so the applications may be more involved, but the idea is that the schools want to see that you have built a connection between yourself, your interest, and what they offer. So as far as so that kind of touches upon the first point in this slide here, helps applicants evaluate best fit options, right? The idea is, okay, you want to maybe apply to all the top schools, but there are certain schools that are better fits for some people, right? It's not always the case that just because you're a really strong student that HBS is the right choice. You might actually be happier at a smaller school like a Yale or a Tuck at Dartmouth, right, where there's a more intimate class where the network is very tight and arguably more responsive. And so the part of this process is all about determining where you would be happy and where you'd find the most success for your 2 years, and then thereafter. The other thing too to keep in mind, which most people are pretty familiar with, is the round selection. That is a little bit different from the college process, where you should understand, what when you're ready to apply, whether it's a round one, round two, three, four, depending on the school if they offer such rounds, and when you and what year, right? Unlike an undergraduate where there's one season, you end high school, that is the logical next step, excusing any sort of gap years. For the MBA process, it's not, for the most part, a required degree, and people go at various different points in their professional career. Some go 2 years after, some go 10 years after. And so understanding when is the right moment is part of this process as well. And the other reason why you want to build a school specific strategy is that it really does, as I mentioned, kind of help you maximize your chances of actually getting in other words, building a stronger application. So a lot of the essays that we'll go through or that you'll see are going to be about, well, why do you want an MBA? What are your career goals? Why is this school a good fit for those career goals? And so doing this research and actually building an application that's geared towards each school separately is going to be really helpful for you, not only to make the app to get through the essays in a least painful way possible, but also putting forward the best product. The same goes for the interviews. It's no different in a lot of ways in interviewing for a company, right? The company wants to know, why do you want to work there? Why do you want to work at McKinsey? Why do you want to work at Goldman Sachs? And you need to have answers that are specific to the school. Otherwise, it'll seem like you're trying to cast too wide of a net, and the schools don't. They can pick up on that. So then they certainly don't appreciate that if you've not done your research and have identified that connection. Potential scholarship implications can also come into play here, in that schools are a lot of times going to give scholarships or grants to students or candidates that they're really excited about. It's one of the strongest tools that they have to recruit those that they accept or give offers to. And so if you're putting forward a very strong why Duke application, that could potentially say, hey, this person has a very strong indication they might want to come here. Let's give them some more money. Potentially, there's no science necessarily behind that, but why not put yourself in the best position possible to get as much money if you're a candidate for it? And then the last point here on this slide about yield is really critical. So unlike in the college process where early decision is, or the early rounds or a strategic play where you apply and it's binding, obviously Columbia, I think, offers that. I don't know if there are any other schools top of mind that do at the MBA level, but the schools do want to know, if we give you this seat, will you take it? Now, I mentioned that as far as scholarships are concerned, but the same idea kind of comes into play here, which is if you wrote a very convincing why Northwestern Kellogg application, the school might believe you that you're more inclined to go, and therefore might be more predisposed to offer you the spot. Again, it's all the same kind of point here. But it is important to, again, make the argument for why, because, a school like Stanford GSB is competing with HBS for cross admits. They're going to want to try and hint at whether you're the right fit or whether you're also applying to HBS and would ultimately take their offer instead of theirs. So part of the early step in the process is doing your research early and thoroughly. So there are a lot of different ways you can do this. And you can take an all the above approach here. I always think that's best, but circumstances, time, and other sort of factors can play into that. So I'm just going to throw them all out there, and you do what you feel is best for yourself. So one of the easiest ways to engage with the school and to learn is go through the actual school website or the admissions office website. They're usually pretty clear about what they're offering and when. That can take the form of information sessions. Those can be on campus. Those can be virtual, especially now that a lot of them went online via COVID. Webinars, similarly, maybe they're about a particular topic or targeting a particular demographic. Coffee chats, those are, again, going through the school where maybe you meet a current student or an alumnus through the school, which can be really helpful. And that's nice because the people from the schools who volunteer to do this are very excited about it. So they're usually a much better indicator than someone who may or may not be involved in the school. But again, register. The key thing here is register through the school's admissions website. And the reason that's so important is because not only is it a structured process where you're going to be guaranteed to get this information, it's all organized on your behalf, but it also forces you to create a profile, and the admissions committee will understand when is you're attending, and it'll be an indication to them that you are interested in the school, that you're making an effort to learn about them. And while that may not be the ultimate reason you do get in or potentially don't get in if you don't do it, it's a nice feather in your cap. And if you're a candidate who's on the fence, why not have that in your back pocket? And as I mentioned, or I guess more or less obvious here, a lot of these things are first come, first serve, and they're not always just posted in advance, right? They're posted or sort of on an incoming basis, in the sense that, like, slots might open up or a new session might open up. They put it on the website, and as soon as it's there, you should sign up. And they may not indicate in advance when that's happening, so you need to be checking regularly if that's interesting to you. Similarly, campus visits and class experiences can be really, really helpful in identifying fit for a school. So, are you interested in a school like HBS or Virginia's Darden School, where it's 100% case study, or do you want more of a lecture based or some sort of hybrid model, maybe a Booth, for example, or a Wharton would offer that? Where do you feel comfortable, and where in your career are you that where this academic experience would make the most sense? So, going to campus, seeing the class will give you a very, very live and real-time experience as to what would work and what wouldn't. And also, when you go to campus, a lot of times they have social events. So Cornell Johnson has, I'm forgetting the name of it, but they have an event, like, I think every other Thursday, where it's thematic in nature. So it might be a Mexican night, it might be put on by the Jewish and the Muslim Society or something like that. And it's a great way to bring everyone together. Usually they're on Thursdays in a lot of cases, because many students or many schools don't have classes on Friday. And so it's a real great way to say, hey, we've just gotten through the week. We're ready to let off some steam. And the schools are very excited about having prospective students attend, because it's a great way for them to engage with a lot of people in a very relaxed, informal setting. So definitely check those out. And if you are visiting campus, maybe you schedule your visit around that, because it can be extremely valuable. The third bullet point here about talking to alumni, current students, and professors is very informal. It's more like if you happen to know people who have attended or are at the school now, or a professor, or you want to cold email a professor or someone who went to the school before, go ahead and do it. I mean, that's a very, very effective way to learn about the school, especially going through someone you may know and feel comfortable with and trust their judgment. So I recommend that. It's also a great thing you can introduce into your essays. So don't hesitate to leverage your contacts and your connections to learn as much about the school as possible. And the fourth point is more or less kind of a housekeeping best practice tip, which is just keep notes, right? Stay organized. When did you talk to so and so person? When did you visit campus? And what was your reaction? Did you like it? Did you find this particular point or this comment someone made stood out for you? And the reason you do that is not only to help keep a memory, so that if and when you have to decide about a school, you can go back to your notes, but also it makes it easier, again, for the essays, where you can incorporate that information rather than having to remember something you did say from months prior. So this slide really kind of talks, it's almost like a follow-on to the previous, in that after you've done all this research, how are you building an understanding of what the school offers or what's special about the school? Now, a lot of MBA programs are going to have a lot of overlap, right? They're all going to have a class on introductory finance, on accounting, on management. I mean, you would hope that, right? The schools shouldn't be that different. Management and business schools in general have been around for over 100 years. They're not reinventing the wheel here. But there are certain, as many people know, school reputations, concentrations, specialties. And while the ones that I've listed here, mainly HBS and management, Wharton and finance, Kellogg and marketing, are pretty obvious to most people, you want to kind of dig even deeper, right? Maybe there's, for example, a specialty in Wharton in China and finance, right? Or maybe there's a particular type of finance focused on derivatives, for example, that is really appealing to you, that would show, if you did your research, that you really understood the school and you didn't just kind of rely on the school's reputation, right? Everyone knows, that these schools are known for them. And if you just kind of cite them in your essays or you talk about in the interviews, it's not going to impress the person on the receiving end of it. You really do need to develop kind of a deeper understanding. And so that's kind of what this second bullet point really kind of touches upon even more. What is a unique major, a program, a dual degree that really fits your interests, maybe fits your background or fills a hole in your background to allow you to get to your ultimate career goal. On a non-academic side, the same kind of goes for notable conferences, treks, which are really just short for kind of like travel and expeditions and clubs. Is there, for example, something at HBS where it's like they have a big social enterprise organization there, like I think a 2 or 3 day conference or something to that effect. That's pretty big, right? You should, if that's something interesting to you, it would be helpful to note that, right? To say, hey, I researched it, or even I attended, or something to that effect, rather than just kind of saying, oh, I'd love to join the HBS Finance Club to expand my knowledge in the field as I prepare to go into investment banking, right? You can almost see differences where someone who's identified very specific things for them, more so than someone who just kind of relies on the generalities. The fourth point about career placement statistics is probably not nearly as important. It's not the type of thing you necessarily need to bring up in an essay or an interview, but it's more for your own education, in that if you want to go into, say, management consulting, and the school only places, let's say, 5% of their class in consulting, maybe that isn't the right fit. And that's not to say you wouldn't make it into that 5%, or that maybe you do stand out or something along those lines, but you don't want to necessarily push a narrative where there's such a few number of people going into a field of interest. So if you want to do, let's say, public policy, and Yale happens to have a good program for that, great, that makes sense. They would say, all right, we understand why the interest is here, even if that's well known. Whereas if you said that to a school like, I don't know, I'm making this up, to UCLA, where I want to work in New York finance, not to say that's not possible, but that might seem off-putting or a little bit of a disconnect. And unless then basically the burden falls on you to really explain why UCLA would be the right fit, as opposed to many of their other peer institutions. So now we're getting a little bit more into the actual application process itself, and while a lot of the schools are similar in that they have multiple rounds, that the dates kind of tend to go in waves, it's not all that similar once you kind of start to actually get into the nitty gritty. So as far as admissions is specifically concerned, what are the round options and when do you apply? So HBS only has 2 rounds. They used to have 3 for many years. Now they have 2. NYU has 4, 2 early in September, October, or maybe it's, sorry, October, November, 1 in January, and then I think 1 in March. You need to know which rounds are optimal for you and when the deadlines are. That can also impact how you want to apply. Maybe you want to apply to a lot of schools up front, and their first round comes 2 weeks later or 2 weeks earlier. You want to plan your own work and progress along those lines so that you're getting it all done. 2 weeks in the application business is an eternity. So just be aware of that. The same goes for admissions rates. I mean, I wouldn't lean too much into this as far as the implications are in terms of rounds, but I do think that you should be aware, broadly speaking, how you think about building your list and which schools are the most competitive. I mean, that kind of falls with the rankings, but are you going to only apply to the M7, that's colloquially sort of the top 7 schools? Are you going to maybe mix and match your rounds? So maybe you're applying to a few lower ranked schools where you have a better chance of getting in, along with some competitive schools early, and then kind of see how that pans out and maybe apply to more in round 2. I don't know. It's really a kind of a risk strategy, but you should keep that in mind. And then class profile breakdown is again, kind of like almost a parallel to what I mentioned in the previous slide about career placement statistics. Don't read too much into it. If the school says that 30% of their applicants or class comes from finance, that just tends to be a function of kind of where they have been, where the school's comfortable in terms of placements and quality, and not so much to say that you couldn't get in. If you were coming from industrial manufacturing, that's fine. That doesn't mean you're competing with the finance people, even if only 5% come from manufacturing, it's just that's how this class breaks down. And maybe you fit in that 5%, or maybe they say, hey, we've got some really good candidates and now we're at 6 or 7%. So don't necessarily mean that what you've seen in years past means it's going to apply to the current year, but it does help create a little bit of a barometer so you understand sort of how many students are accepted year over year. I wouldn't do it also based on 1 year. I do it based on trailing 3 to 5 to give you a better median and mean for that matter. The recommendation letters are interesting. We'll talk about that in a subsequent slide, but the thing to note here is that a lot of times the questions are similar. In years past, a lot of the top schools have asked candidates or recommenders to talk about how the student or the applicant compares to their peers. And the second question is a lot of times about constructive criticism. Some of the other schools might have a little bit different types of questions. Usually it's two. The point is that they're different, and also certainly the word counts are different. Some are 500 words, some are 250. So while I do encourage your recommenders to kind of have similar anecdotes and approaches to a lot of these questions, they shouldn't look at it as a one size fits all solution. You do need to work with them and work in advance with them, because these things are a huge ask. They do take time. And a lot of times it creates a lot of stress and can oftentimes be the bottleneck for the candidate in terms of how quickly and how many schools they can apply to. The third bullet point here about school-specific essays and overlap between schools is very, very key. This is a huge kind of strategy that a lot of applicants have to think about as far as how many schools they apply to, when, in what order they write them. So a lot of times you'll see there is overlap. So Columbia might ask, well, why do you want an MBA, or why is the Columbia MBA a good fit? NYU may say, why do you want an MBA? If Columbia says, why do you need a Columbia MBA? Those are different questions. There's probably going to be a lot of overlap because, you should be making similar points, but want versus need, and the general MBA idea of an MBA versus the school-specific MBA requires a nuanced understanding of what the prompt is specifically asking. You can't just take the essay from one and apply it to the other, because the schools will know that. They read thousands upon thousands of these essays. If you think that they can identify patterns, then you shouldn't be in this business. So just keep that in mind. And again, fourth bullet point here is another housekeeping best practice, which is be organized. Keep a detailed spreadsheet or calendar so that you're not missing deadlines. When things are coming up, when the recommendation letters are due, and so forth, so that this way, you can control that element of the process. And most successful candidates I've worked with, or at least have seen from a distance, have really put all the information in an organized way, and that's helped them clear their mind and think about the content creation point as opposed to the organizational side of things. So this is as I mentioned, we're going to talk about recommendation letters here. This is a little tricky because while this is something you can have an influence on, it's not totally in your control for obvious reasons. The recommenders are supposed to be writing this themselves and giving authentic content and feedback to the schools. But you do want to work with people with whom you've worked, professionally for a while. So what I do recommend, though, is to the extent your recommenders are willing to kind of coordinate on which schools they're applying to, how to kind of shape the school-specific strategy, you should kind of mention to them, like, look, the schools do have certain things that they target. That doesn't mean, again, that if you're a technical person, you wouldn't end up at another school. But it is important to understand that, and a lot of people do know this, but I'm just going to put it out there, like HBS, is known for, they're looking for leadership, right? It's a management focused school. The case method, it's what they're known for. I think the motto is like educating leaders who make a difference in the world. And so you do need to stress that, your recommenders do need to stress that subtly or directly in their letters. The same thing for Wharton. While every business or MBA degree is going to have a quantitative component to it, Wharton is known to be more technical in nature. So the schools want to know from the recommenders, is this person going to be able to hack it, right? Can they keep up with the technical level of work that our curriculum demands? And the same goes for Kellogg in terms of teamwork. It's a lot of focus on marketing, on consulting. Can you work in teams? Is this person a leader and a teammate when appropriate in the right circumstances? And so there are ways to indicate this in the letters themselves, or the responses to the questions for the recommendation letters. But There are also sometimes matrices or checklists where they ask the recommenders to rank the candidates based on certain attributes or criteria. And so you kind of want to, as best you can, have them put you high up in the criteria that match up with the schools. And I get this question a lot regarding the second main bullet point, but the focus is, well, should I get recommendations from alumni of schools? The answer is yes and no. It's obviously not necessary, as I point out here in the slide, and it can be helpful, but it only really helps insofar as the alumnus of the school will know how to connect you, the candidate, to what the school is looking for. Kind of similarly to the first point, just with a different status. But unless, to be frank, the alumnus is a very influential person, it's unlikely going to sway the admissions committee to say, well, we should take candidate B because they have a recommender who went to Dartmouth Tuck, whereas candidate A, who was slightly stronger, did not have someone writing the recommendation from them who's in our network. You see, it's not really fair to people who don't have that connection. Now, where it could come into play is if you end up finding yourself on a wait list and someone can put in a letter of support. That can be valuable, and that's where having connections to people who went to the school you're looking at can be valuable. But beyond that, it's not entirely critical. So if you go through the application process and you are fortunate enough to get an interview, you do really need to understand the differences in the school-specific interview. So the first point is fairly obvious in that not every interview format or structure is going to be the same. So some are going to be one-on-one, kind of your traditional interviewer candidate kind of or interviewee setup. Sometimes it's multiple on one. There might be two people in the room. One maybe might be taking notes, maybe asking questions. That has happened a lot of cases. Maybe they're training someone. So just be aware. Don't be alarmed if it's 2 or 3 on 1. That happens all the time. And then the third is a group interview. Wharton has rolled this out over the last few years, and you just have to know how you prepare for that and what is the different strategy that you would deploy compared to a one-on-one or more traditional interview. The same kind of goes for who will be interviewing you. Each school has a very different process, and even within each school, they might have different people interviewing you just based on resources or how they decided to kind of organize their process. So schools that use it, the actual admissions committee members are HBS, NYU, amongst others. Maybe a Georgetown might bring their admissions officer in. It doesn't. You have to know what that process is, and the schools will tell you, and you'll certainly know in advance of the interview. But that is going to be a little bit different, in my personal and professional opinion, than say an alumnus in your area or a second-year student, because it'll also depend on whether the interview is what we call blind or not, and by blind, we mean that the interviewer knows very little about your profile or background. Maybe they have a copy of your resume. Maybe they know where you are, where you work, or obviously it's covered in the resume, but they have little information about you, and so they're trying to extract information. So you have to spend a lot of time kind of almost updating them or getting them up to speed as to what you present in your application. Whereas if it's a non-blind interview, which is often the case with people who are being interviewed by admissions committee members, they are going to have likely read your application. So they'll have read your essays, the recommendation letters, any sort of small or short answer questions you've asked. And so their questions might be different. They may be more trying to clarify information that you've presented, or trying to go in a different direction, perhaps one in which you did not go in your essay. For example, let's just say you chose not to talk about extracurricular activities much at the college level in your MBA application. They might ask, well, what were you involved in college? And then dig into that. Or maybe you wrote about a particular project you worked on at work, but given the word constraints and the essays did not really dig too much into it, they may say, let's talk about this project in more detail. So just know your audience and what information they have going into it. And the last point here about sort of not using a one-size-fits-all approach for each interview is extremely critical. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, you wouldn't necessarily say you wanted to do the same thing or have the same focus if you're applying for one company versus another. The same goes for the MBA schools. You want to kind of tailor your answers and your story to fit what the school offers. And again, you don't need to be an entirely different or a chameleon here and change colors for every school. That would almost be difficult and probably lacking in authenticity. But you do want to make sure that, for example, if you're talking about what you look to study and you're interviewing at HBS, you do want to talk about the case study, or at least apply or think about how the case study would apply to your learnings and how you're going to develop academically. That would obviously not work at a school like Booth, where that isn't necessarily the standard, holistic approach. So just keep that in mind. And you usually have time to prepare for these interviews. So there's really no excuse as to why you can't come up with a different set of answers for questions that require it. So let's move on to the next slide. This is on the other side of the process, and I know that could feel like a long ways from now, and it is, so don't downplay that. But once let's just say you are in a fortunate enough position where you get into a school, or you get into multiple schools, and you want to assess your options and fits what's best. Well, hopefully by that point, you will have had a good understanding based on all the research you've done, all the people you've met, and so forth, as to where you'd want to go. But, choices are tough, and there are things to weigh. And oftentimes on Gmat Club, I ask questions about option A versus B versus C, and maybe scholarship money plays into it. So it is a difficult decision, and it's an important one. So taking this part seriously is almost as important as everything that kind of led up to it. So the first bullet point here about evaluating your acceptances, your scholarship options, the best way to do this, in my personal opinion, is to kind of come up with a rank ordered priorities list, right? Think about rather than just kind of saying, well, I'm weighing this option against that option and this geography against that scholarship or what have you. Think about what is most important to you. Is being in, say, a country of where you want to work after going to be vastly more important than, say, a school that's known for the field you want to be in. So let's just say you want to be in the US, and you were accepted to Carnegie Mellon's Tepper School, which is known a lot of times for finance and tech and operations. Is that a better fit than, say, Rotman in Canada, which may have a focus area that's more interesting to you, but is in Canada? So you guys have to think about that. And also the scholarship options as well. How much money are you getting? I mean, there's a whole process and a discussion about how you can leverage scholarship money and how to consider these things and kind of almost close the gap between them, but we'll save that for another time. Second bullet point is kind of just a point I've already mentioned about full cost. Think about the standard of living. Some cities are, going to Columbia or NYU is going to be arguably more expensive because of rent and just cost than going to Cornell, same state, but in a rural environment. So, are you bringing a family with you? Do you have to worry about, finding housing? These are all very real considerations that one must take into account when deciding, right? And the same thing goes for families and spouses where someone needs to find employment, all fair. You just have to weigh it as it relates to you on a very, very personal basis. One that probably should have put this third point actually first, but and actually the fourth as well. This is all just kind of talking about research. Again, this is on the other side of it, which is if you do get into programs, try and go to as many information sessions and welcome events and things that are hosted by the school to attract and inform accepted candidates as you can, because those are going to be really helpful. It's a little bit different process, right? You're not trying to impress someone. You're actually not kind of talking about hypothetical. You're talking about your actual decision here. And so they can be, not only are they really informative, they're a lot of fun too, right? And while yields are what they are per school, a lot of times you get to meet people who you're going to be fellow classmates, or who are going to be your fellow classmates. So why not? I know many people who I met when I went to my admitted student welcome programs who I'm still friendly with today. And so it's just a really good experience to the extent you can find the time from work and, you can afford it and so forth. But I strongly recommend doing that. Or again, talking to as many people who've gone there, professors, just to get a feel for where you would be happy for the next 2 years. So that concludes the prepared remarks. I am going to take questions, as I mentioned, and if you have any more, or if you have any questions, feel free to jump in. And like I said, introduce yourself, give us as much context as possible. And one other point I'll mention now, and probably again at the end, please visit us at admissionauto.com to learn more information, or gmatclub.com, where you can find our page under Ask Admissions Consultants. We're happy to take questions, redirect you as appropriately if you can't get your question in today or something comes up after viewing this presentation and you still want to get in touch with us. So let us begin the Q&A. Do you want me to read off the list here? Okay, I'm going to just take the lead here then in that case. And I will say that someone wrote here, I am from India working as a software engineer for the last 6 months and want to do an MBA. I don't know where to start. I assume struggling in verbal. So I'm not 100% sure on this context. I would say that the best thing you can do to start, it might be, okay, so if you're talking about the Gmat, what I would say is pick up a study book, maybe pick up a course, a tutor, depending on your financial means, and familiarize yourself with the exam. Understand what the verbal component is asking for and how to prepare for it. If you're talking about the actual process itself, and I actually think that's probably what you're asking, what I would say again is start with the information sessions. They are really well designed by the schools to tell you about what the MBA process looks like, what their program is focused on. They're usually an hour or so, maybe longer, and that'll give you a good structure to kind of help you build a repository of information and to start digging deeper based on particular areas or topics of interest within that session. Alternatively, again, depending on your means, you might want to reach out to an admissions consultant and bring them on. We do that all the time where we bring people through our advanced planning program, and that kind of help get them started, or even without the advanced planning program, they know they want to apply, they want someone to help them. We get them started, we organize them, we say, hey, here's the information you need to be looking at, here are the schools you can consider, here's what an MBA would offer. So the more people you can talk to professionally and through the academic system, the better. So Siddharth writes, can I get into top universities without work experience? It's very unlikely. I mean, there are some programs out there where they will accept students from the undergraduate position into an MBA. Some offer sub-matriculation. I didn't really talk about this, where you can actually apply while you're in school and then kind of roll into the MBA program. Usually that's if there's like an undergraduate business. That can be challenging and it's very rare. But the general answer is most MBA programs require work experience. And usually that's like a minimum of 2 years. If you look at a lot of US programs, it's kind of between 3 and 5 or 3 and 6. This information is publicly available on each school's website as to what the median and mean age is in terms of years of full-time work experience. So I recommend researching that. But there also are what's called deferred MBA programs. This has become a very popular program, or at least one of interest, certainly, where you apply while you're in undergraduate. Maybe it's your junior year, senior year, or something around that time. You actually can get accepted without the work experience, but then you're required to work for, say, 2 or 3 years thereafter before you matriculate. So it's deferred because you're not starting right out of school, but some several years later. And that just tells you that the MBA programs do value work experience. They want you to go out there and understand what business world looks like and not approach it from sort of a theoretical standpoint. So I would say, if you are looking at top universities, get some work experience or look at the deferred MBA programs and then go from there. Okay, so someone wrote, I don't think bringing my family out from India would be sensible. This is not a question, but I'm happy to address it in the sense that, yeah, that's fair. You have to make the decision that's right for you. If remaining in India is appropriate for your family, then you stay in India. There are many great programs there. That doesn't mean that you necessarily have to go get an MBA outside. You could also look at an online program, right? Or something where maybe it's part-time. I mean, that can be very taxing depending on how far you have to travel. But I've seen and heard about a lot of different circumstances where people are able to balance having a family in one area and attending a program in another. You just have to think about, the right balance given where your priorities are in life at this moment. Okay, great. So another question we have here are, what are some courses that can be taken by a candidate to show to the AdCom or admissions committee an applicant's ability to handle the rigor of an MBA program, GMAT scores excluded? So this is tricky because I happen to be of the belief, and you might get other opinions, that separate courses, I'm assuming this is on a post-bac or separate from undergraduate, that courses you're talking about here don't tend to matter that much. But let me kind of unpack this. So first of all, if you are still an undergraduate and you're watching this session, maybe it applies to this particular Vinayak, I think it is. I would take a mix between qualitative and quantitative classes. Do well in your maths, do well in your English, because the schools want to see that you have both the quantitative and the qualitative skills to handle the courses. So a lot of times they'll look at, or they will oftentimes look at, how you performed in undergraduate to see, can this person handle the academic rigor of an MBA program? It's not a perfect one for one, but because a bachelor's degree is required for for everyone to be admitted, that is one apples to apples comparison. So that's one thing. Outside courses can be tricky. I mean, some people do master's degree. I don't think you need to get a separate graduate degree just to kind of prove or improve your chances in the MBA admissions process. But it can help. Maybe you did some sort of study in operation statistics. It won't certainly hurt you, assuming you didn't do poorly academically. It just may not be held, or it definitely won't be held in the same regard as the undergraduate program. And then finally, the big question is like, well, can I take separate courses like Coursera, edX, HBS Core, things like that? It doesn't hurt. And at the very least, you're learning. I mean, never disregard the importance of that. But it's not going to undo, say, poor academic performance at the undergraduate level. It's just going to be something that they're going to say, okay, this candidate was very interested. They went ahead to try and demonstrate this. We'll take into account, but it'll be part of the holistic process. So I know that's kind of a general answer. Hopefully there was some specifics with it, but the most important thing you can do, honestly, is a lot of times show in your project work that you have the skills at work to be able to apply that in an academic setting. All right, so someone here, Rundarth, apologies for the pronunciation, is giving a profile here. They're saying GMAT 720, McKinsey 4 years, engineering background, Indian male, co-founder of a small startup, also raises small fund into algorithmic option trading, want to be at HBS, how, need to retake GMAT, CFA level. Okay, so it all sounds interesting. I don't think you necessarily need to take the GMAT again, but since HBS round one doesn't come for a while, why not? It will not hurt you. You can only do better. And the 720, the schools count the highest score. So 720 will be the floor for your application. If you can bump it up 20, 30 points, that would be great. It, again, won't hurt you. But I don't think that a 720, even coming from a competitive demographic, will filter you out. So that's up to you as far as how much time and effort you want to put into that to do that. But if it's a matter of some minimal preparation, or you can put the preparation in and you can take it again, have at it. I don't see, again, the downside. I can't say that HBS is a guarantee here. There's a lot of generalities baked into the way you've described this. Again, that's not the appropriate format to get in touch with us, talk about your profile in more depth with one of our consultants. That will be really helpful. Even, by the way, when they talk to you, they won't be able to guarantee it, especially for a school like HBS. But you do have a very interesting background. And while being a male Indian engineer can be competitive, and certainly McKinsey is great, but also competitive, it's not a guarantee for almost anyone. And so I'd say if you want to go for it, do the research, show your interest in the school, follow this guideline or this framework that I've laid out, and then take your best shot, but certainly apply to other schools as well. Okay, great. I don't know. I'm not seeing any other questions here, which is rare. Either I did a very good job of walking everyone through this, or people are just quiet for what I guess a lot of people is the summer. Okay, great. All right, so Um, Rather than just stay online here, again, I will just say if you are interested in learning more, especially those. Okay, I will jump into a question here. We have my GPA is so low, 2.0, Gmat score 734. I don't know how that's possible, but we'll let that slide. College freshers also work as an education secretary in my college and started two clubs in my college as well. Okay, so can you phrase your question? Is it, how do you approach the GPA, or where could okay, also founder of a trending app, so if that helps. I mean, so I don't know what the question is, but I'll jump in anyways, and if you ask it, I can certainly pivot my answer. It would say that a low GPA is not um, a death knell. Like I've seen people with low GPAs who have found success in the process. Um, if there's a reason for it, it's appropriate to talk about that in what is for a lot of schools the optional essay. Sometimes they'll give you 250, 500 words, something to that effect, where you can speak to why it is low, or at least offer some explanation. Usually if a GPA is that low, you kind of do need to find some reason, not just, oh, I didn't care enough. My guess is you don't, because you're clearly very motivated here, but it is something you need to consider. But the MBA process, or the admissions process, is a holistic one. They will look at all the different factors: your GMAT, your work experience, what you've done extracurricularly, your leadership, your recommendation letters, which is why I spent the time going kind of through all those components. So I would not worry all that much about one particular factor, but it can be important. So just keep in mind that you might have to hedge your list and not just go for all the top schools, but think about schools where they might be a little lower than what you perhaps wanted to go to, but you will have a better shot because they will be more forgiving. So it's just something to take into consideration. Okay. So I'm not going to stick around too much longer. So what I'm just going to say again here is it's been a real pleasure presenting to those who have been live and those who are watching at a later point on a recorded basis. Please again visit admissionauto.com, gmatclub.com, and get in touch with the right people. You have time. It's only June, although the summer tends to go by quickly. So if you are thinking about round one, if you're thinking about round two, or this year, or even next year, this is the time to start. Do your research, get your ducks in a row, and make sure that you are spending all the right efforts to build a school specific strategy. It does matter, as you can see, hopefully, in how I've laid things out. I have, sorry, one more question. I'll get into it just because I'm still here. Due to the pandemic, there has been a big gap, 3+ years, in my promotions due to budget constraints. During that time, I have taken many additional responsibilities in my role, but never had that required. Okay, that's fine. I mean, look, you can talk about that in the optional essay if that's the right that is the right use of that space. It has to be determined, but also that's a great place where recommenders can speak to that. If they have allowed you to take on these responsibilities, and they've given these things to you, they should note that. They should say, look, the reason he was due for a promotion, we just couldn't do it because of the budget constraint, but that doesn't mean he wasn't deserving on it. He's basically represented or filled in the role that he would have had. He just doesn't have the title. So there are plenty of ways to deal with that. I would not worry. Okay, we've got a couple more things, and I'm still here, so I'm going to keep going. Uh, is part-time job experience while undergraduate studies counted? Yes, it is counted. It's not going to be. It's more. Think of it more as kind of an extracurricular activity in a way, and that's not to say, again, it's not held the same way. It would be viewed differently, but it's more like that than it is full-time work experience, because there's just a different demand when it comes to being a full-time employee than it does part-time. And so it will be considered. It'll show part of your strength to balance academics and work, but it's not going to probably count towards the number of years or months of work experience that will fit you into the right bucket for admissions. So the follow-on question to the previous one was, does that affect much if I can explain the impact in the work that I have done? Yes, absolutely. No, the promotion will not matter, right? I mean, it'd be nice to have the title because it just is confirmation, but it won't. As long as you're adequately explaining how you've grown in the role, and that information is confirmed effectively by your recommenders, or who in a lot of cases would be a supervisor. So we have a question here that says, do business schools mainly relate negatively while admissions process if you haven't decided yet which certain career to pass? So they won't fault you. The short answer, the hard answer to that is no, in the sense that like the schools for the most part are asking questions like, well, why do you want to get an MBA? What are your short and long term goals? So it's going to be pretty hard to get through a process in an effective way without having career goals. So my best advice to that is do not feel that this process is you're setting you in stone in any way. It's supposed to, and the schools know that. I mean, many people say one thing, do another, not because they're being disingenuous, but necessarily because priorities might change, circumstances change, whatever that may be. They recognize that people have the flexibility to go in the direction they feel is the best fit. So but what I do say is you kind of have to view this as a snapshot in time, which is okay, in this given moment, what would you want to do? What could you see yourself doing? And the schools want to see that you have a plan, that you've thought about it, that you can lay out what a strategy might look like. Because they don't want you to come in aimlessly and say, I'm going to figure it out. It's 2 years. It goes by really quickly, especially when you think about the fact that a first year experience is different from a second year experience in a lot of ways, fundamentally. And so you do need to present a story. And again, that story may change, but you do need to present one in mind. So they would view it negatively if you kind of said, I'm still figuring it out, or, oh, I plan to be a CEO one day. That will not fly. Specificity and detail is key here. So we actually got some more questions, which is great. I have 8 years of work experience already at the C level, I assume C-suite level. What can I do to convince business schools that I'm better suited as an MBA than an executive MBA candidate? Well, that's fine. I mean, 8 years of experience is not a crazy amount where you'd have to go to the executive MBA. It could be very appropriate that, excuse me, an MBA is the right step. So what you have to do is you have to talk about what you will learn that will help you in the classroom, right? They say, listen, I'm already an executive. I've had all this managerial experience, but I've also haven't had exposure to this or this fundamental or this experience in management. And so this would be really helpful, despite sort of my title. And the other thing too is don't forget, it's not just academic. There's going to be a lot of career development. There's going to be treks. There's going to be industry related things. There's a social component, building a network. I mean, there's a lot of things that the MBA offers that you can choose to focus on rather than purely just saying, hey, I need to learn more about how business is done. So you just kind of need to find the right balance and say, listen, being full-time and being fully immersed is the best way for me to move forward in my career and achieve whatever the goals are that I've set. So it's just a matter of shifting that focus. And by the way, that happens with a lot of people too, where, for example, they're sponsored by their company. So in other words, they do 2 years and then they go back and work for a certain number of years in exchange for the MBA being paid for by their employer. It's hard to argue that they need to necessarily learn a huge number of things as it relates to their short-term goal, right? They're going to move on and graduate into a similar role or a more advanced one. So they have to focus on other things, right? How do they develop their profile? How do they make themselves a more well-rounded business professional? So we have a question here, which is what type of things are changing in the deferred MBA admissions? I don't understand the question. I don't know what things are changing, but I will speak generally that more and more schools are offering these programs. They're small, keep in mind, because the schools still want to get people through the regular full-time work experience process. So they're not huge. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but there's a handful of them, and they're often very, very competitive, and oftentimes rely very heavily on things like grades and Gmat score. The bar is set high because the schools don't have the full-time work experience to lean on to evaluate them that way. So it is tricky. And also the other thing too is a lot of times the schools will target people with sort of unconventional backgrounds. So maybe it's someone who's very STEM focused. It's someone who is maybe thinking about going to med school or the healthcare. They're not looking for like the hedge fund guy, right? Or the aspiring hedge fund guy or the management consultant, because while they will take some, I think, who are in that category, they can have their pick of the litter later. That's not what this program is designed for. It's designed to say, hey, we want you to get we don't want the decision to get an MBA made, or rather the decision to get an MBA, we don't want to be more challenging down the road because circumstances change. Maybe you're a woman who's thinking about starting a family, you want to balance a career. We don't want you to have to we want you to have the plan set so that this is going to happen and you'll benefit from it rather than introducing new factors later on. So another question here is for a candidate who comes from an overrepresented category, in this case, Indian male engineer, what can be the areas that one can distinguish oneself from the rest that might create an impact? So the best ways to do this, and there's no one size fits all, as I've said many times before, is to think about what is your personal story, right? Just because you've talked about, your nationality, your gender, and your training doesn't mean that defines who you are. You're an individual just like everyone else is in this world. What personal stories from your family, right, have you experienced? What extracurricular hobbies have you been involved in where maybe you've gone deep into something? Maybe you've done something that breaks the mold, or even if you are in, I might not recall this correctly, but maybe you're in McKinsey, maybe, right? What have you focused on a particular area at McKinsey? Maybe you focus on oil and gas. I mean, and you found within a specific sector within oil and gas, right? Find what you think are the stories and the examples that really help set you apart, and then go head first into those, right? Really make those the focus as opposed to trying to saying, well, here's my overall profile. Right, you're never going to be able to change who you are in terms of your core composition, but that doesn't mean the focus of your application should be on that. But again, that's what we do at Admissionado. We are very, very focused on identifying your unique narrative and how you can extract that and put it into paper form effectively. So we have a question here about ideally how many schools will you advise candidates to apply to in different countries? Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't think I've ever gotten that because I don't think countries really come into account. It's not like there's country by country trends necessarily, although I don't know, Canadian schools are a little bit easier to get into because they lower Gmat scores. I mean, there are trends, don't get me wrong, but I think the key thing is to say, okay, well, where do you want to go to school, right? Where do you want to end up? Do you want to be in the US? Do you want to be in UK? I do see people who apply to two different continents or two different countries. That's not unheard of at all. In fact, sometimes that can be very advisable, but I don't think I have a particular number. I think you need to sit down and say, all right, how much time do I have? How many schools do I want to apply to in which rounds? Where are the schools I'm most excited about? Where do I think I have the best chance? And then kind of build a risk reward strategy based off of that. I don't think you can say there's an exact number necessarily. So again, this would be a great way for us if you want to engage with us to kind of talk through that, understand better how you're thinking about your career goals and the geographic implications of that. But I wouldn't want to give you a false answer as to the exact number there. Okay. So I'm not seeing any other questions, and we are actually now at the bottom of the hour, at least a couple minutes before. So I'll just wrap up again by saying it's been a real pleasure. I've quite enjoyed the questions, quite enjoyed presenting to you. Please get in touch with us if you think we can be of help. If you have more questions, we're always happy to be of help, and hopefully, you've gotten a lot out of this session and can do so as you continue to explore your MBA journey. So thanks again, everyone, and best of luck to all those applying.